There are at least 4 options to reduce CO2 emissions. They are not independent, they are not causally linked, but it's something that is quite convenient to think about the problem of reducing CO2 emissions. First, reduce the size of the population. Well, I'm not going to embark in that because it's another topic, completely another topic. Reduce the growth of GDP per capita, so it's degrowth, which is popular among students in France now. Reducing the energy intensity of GDP, and so for reducing the energy intensity of GDP, you have two directions, 2 possible directions. Either act on the supply side or on the demand side. So acting on the supply side means changing production methods, like doing circular economy, recycling, changing the way we produce. It's also technical progress, energy-saving technical progress, innovations to find cleaner products, cleaner ways of produce, or cleaner technologies. This is for the supply side. And then you have the demand side. And the demand side is changing behavior. And if you do that on the supply side and the demand side, you change the energy intensity of GDP, meaning that you need less energy to produce €1 of GDP. Okay? And then you have the fourth aspect, which is reducing the carbon intensity of energy. This is the decarbonization. This is the energy transition. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going here to focus on the third item, and more specifically about the demand, okay? The demand aspects. Empirically, at the global level, the progress that have been made since decades is through energy-saving technical progress. So the energy intensity of GDP has been reduced. We have not really decreased the carbon intensity of energy, as we have seen just before. This is where the progress has been made, but it is too small, too limited, too low, too slow. Okay? And so in the debate recently in France, but I think it's probably the same in other countries, the emphasis has been put on demand, on the demand side. And so what is it? What is it about? What does it mean, reducing demand? So first, we may wonder what demand we want to reduce. Is it global demand? Do we think that we want to just to consume less globally? So this would be the degrowth option. I'm not going to focus on that, really. What I'm going to focus on is decreasing the demand for polluting goods, GHG intensive goods. And the topic here, the point here, is to change not global demand, but the composition of demand, okay? So it's easier than reducing global demand, but it's not so easy to achieve. Why? Because we have seen before, the energy, the fossil energy, they have shaped our economy very, very strongly. They have shaped the way we live in the space. They have shaped what we consume, how we produce. So there is a very strong path dependency, and there is a sort of addiction to fossils. Okay, we are fossil addicts, basically. So changing the composition of demand is not going to be an easy task, but it will be easier probably than to reduce global demand. Just a remark, will it be enough to change the composition of demand to achieve what we want to do? Probably not, because there is always this debate about the planetary boundaries, the fact that we are probably too much compared to what our planet is able to sustain. Okay, so I'm not going to enter this debate, but of course it's important to have that in mind, first. And second, what is important is not really GDP or demand, it's welfare, okay? Maybe we can be as happy as we are with less demand, but more clean air or more leisure or whatever. So I think Mark will talk about that this afternoon, so I'm not going to enter that as well. But it is just to put, to just a remark. Okay, so come back to demand. So to reduce demand, change the composition of demand, it can be achieved through price policies. Price policies like carbon tax. This is what the economists favor, clearly. But in our world today, probably the economists are the only people happy with this solution. Okay. The other people don't like very much these price policies. There is this acceptability issue, Gilets jaunes in France, so you know that completely. So price policy, we like that, but problems of implementation. So I'm going to focus here, not on that, not on changes in the composition of demand triggered by prices, but I'm going to focus on voluntary changes in demand, and this is what I will name sobriety, okay? Sobriety would be voluntary reduction of demand for carbon-emitting goods. So what I want to do is to define what it is exactly, what are their determinants of this sobriety, first at the individual level, and then at the social level, societal dimension of sobriety. And really, I adopt the point of view of economists because there is a lot of literature in sociology, in other social sciences on this topic, but I will adopt mostly the point of view of economists, of economics. Okay, so first, let's talk about the individual level. There is a lot of literature now from international organization or from the IPCC. So let's take the example of the International Energy Agency. So they have published a report in 2021, Zero Net Emissions, ZEN. And what they say is that what we need is changes in ongoing or repeated behavior on the part of consumers which impact energy service demand or the energy intensity of an energy-related activity. Okay, so it's international organization. It's not very easy to understand what they mean, actually, but what they mean in the end is change the composition of demand. So they identify three main types of behavioral changes. First, reducing excessive or wasteful energy use. Second, transport mode switching, to switch to cleaner transports. And third, making materials efficiency gains through higher rates of recycling or better design of materials or better construction of vehicles or buildings and so on. I wanted to show you that because you see here that the frontier between behavioral change and technical innovation and infrastructure change is not so easy to determine. It's quite fuzzy. Okay, what is really behavioral change? When you talk about better design in construction, it's not really behavioral change. Okay, so it's quite mixed. Anyway, with this definition, what they do is to try to identify milestones for 2030 and 2050 in industry, transport, building, what could be the objectives for these behavioral changes. Okay, so yeah, nothing really surprising. And what they do in the end is that they quantify the power of all that. If we achieve all that, what will it do on emissions? Okay, is the potential of these behavioral changes big or small? Okay, for compared to the total emissions. So this is what they find. This is their scenario, net zero emission scenario, and you see behavioral changes. It's the green here. So for them to achieve net zero emission in 2050, the bulk of the job will be done by low carbon technologies here. and low carbon technologies here. So all that, blue and orange, it's innovation, basically. Okay, and behavioral changes and materials, like better design of buildings and so on, for them it's very small impact. Okay. On the other hand, you have IPCC. So IPCC 2022, in the 6th assessment report that Frank has just talked about, Working Group 3, they evaluate also the potential of reduction in demand for reducing global emissions. And their evaluation is far more bigger, okay? They say it's as much as 40 to 70% of the job that can be done by changing demand. So this is completely different. For them, the reduction in demand that they consider is wider than mere behavioral changes. So they adopt this classification: avoid, shift, improve. So avoid is giving up some very carbon-emitting consumption, like long-haul flights or living car-free. Shift is adopting less carbon-intensive modes of consumption, like cycling, for instance, or lentils instead of meat, clearly. Improve is changing equipments. So adopting green innovation like heat pump, electric vehicles, and so on. So for International Energy Agency, this improve wouldn't be classified as a behavioral change. Behavioral changes would be avoid and shift. Okay. But for the IPCC, the potential is huge. This is a study done by Carbon 4 in France. The same idea, looking at what can be done if you are a French heroic person. Heroic means that you do you change your lifestyle very much. What you can achieve as reduction emissions by changing your lifestyle. They try to evaluate that, and in the end, what they find is that a generalized heroic behavior reduces your carbon footprint by around 1/4, 26%. Okay, so it's quite, it's not nothing. And the biggest part is by becoming vegetarian, clearly. Okay, this is the orange here. This is what you can do, the most that you can do to reduce your emissions. The other small gestures are less efficient. So this is just an example. And if you are not a heroic person, but just an average, you change but just a bit, you can reduce your emission by 5 to 10%. Okay. So I think this is interesting. This shows that small gesture or changing behavior, it can achieve, it's not at all negligible, okay? It can achieve something. It won't be sufficient, but it's not negligible. Another way to look at these things differently, but I'm not going to bother you with computations, but just to give you a flavor, is to adopt a more equation-based, let's say, perspective, and to try to have a simple representation of what behavioral changes could achieve. So what I want to study here is a taste shock. Okay, a taste shock on preferences. So I take a usual representation of consumption. C is aggregate consumption. CB, is consumption of brown goods. CG is consumption of green goods. And your aggregate consumption is an aggregate of the two. It's a CES form, meaning that the two goods are substitute, but not completely. Okay, sigma here is the elasticity of substitution. And there is a share, alpha and 1 minus alpha, in your consumption basket for brown and green goods. And the utility, the household maximizes consumption, wants to get higher degree of consumption, taking into account, of course, budget constraint and prices, okay, of the goods. I take an exogenous budget constraint. I take exogenous prices for brown and green goods. I do some computations. And what do I find? I compute the change in the parameter of preferences alpha. Alpha here is the parameter that shows the weight of brown preferences. Oh, no, excuse me, alpha is green. No, alpha is brown. Brown preferences in your consumption basket. Okay. I compute what would be the change in this parameter of preferences that would achieve the same reduction of brown consumption as a price policy. Okay, so I do my computations, okay, and what I find is that this alpha should decrease to achieve the same reduction of emissions as a price policy targeting the price of brown goods. And this alpha should decrease all the more since the elasticity of substitution between brown and green goods is small. Meaning if the goods are not very substitutable, if it is difficult to switch from brown to green, then the taste shock should be very big to achieve the decrease of emissions, okay? First. Second, if the initial share of brown goods in the consumption basket is big, also the change in preferences has to be bigger, okay, to achieve the reduction of emissions, okay? So this means that, okay, a taste shock, change in preferences can make the job, it can reduce emissions, like a price policy, but to achieve the desired reduction in emission, the taste shock has to be very big if the goods are poor substitutes and if the initial share of brown goods in the consumption basket is high, which is the situation now. My conclusion is that the change in preferences would not easily replace carbon pricing or price policies, okay? Because it should be huge. Okay. Then another type of taste shock, it's not just a question of alpha, 1 minus alpha. There are other determinants of preferences that could also be changed. Little example. Decrease in preference for diversity towards preference for quality. A little example about ultra-fast fashion. Shein versus Loom. If you don't know what Loom is, I'm going to explain. So Shein, maybe everybody or the youngest know what it is. It is an ultra-fast fashion Chinese company, okay? It's the most popular fashion brand at the world level. They offer 7,200 new models of clothes per day, not per year, okay, per day. And on average, these clothes, you use them twice, and then you put them into the bin, and then they arrive in Africa in huge mountains of waste, okay? And so, of course, they are very, very cheap. With the jean at 15 euros, and the communication of the firm focuses on that, the flashy nature of the models, and they are very low price, okay? The CO2 emission by the fashion industry are equivalent to CO2 emission of aviation, okay, just to put things into perspective. On the other hand, you have Loom. Loom, I give this example not to make any particular publicity for them, but just because I have a daughter who is addict to Loom, okay? So what is Loom? Loom is a small French company. The collection is the same every year, the same this year, that's the year before, and so on. 2 models of sweaters, 2 models of T-shirts, some underwear, some socks, 1 pair of jeans, 1 pair of sneakers, all available in 2 or 3 colors, okay? And the communication focuses exclusively on the quality and longevity of the clothes and their reduced ecological impacts. I wonder how they make their money, okay? But anyway, so this is just to tell you that it's not, the change in preferences, it is not just, it's complex. It's not just about the small CES utility function I showed you before. There are a lot of dimensions, of course, preference for diversity versus preference for quality, preference for changing all the time, and so on and so on. So it's quite It's complex. How you trigger behavioral changes? So, so these behavioral changes, they may be triggered by several means, let's say, by information, so education, information campaigns, labels, and so on, by nudges, by media, advertising, imitation of influencers, stuff like that, by switch in the mood of your reference group, your friends, your family, colleagues at work, by the renewal of generations, and by the price policy itself. So economics has a lot to say about that, but has also a lot to learn from other social sciences. And so I have had a look at the literature on all these topics, because for us, what is important is whether it works or not. Do informational campaigns, education, labels, do they work? Nudges, do they work? So is this really means to change behavioral changes? If you look at the literature, so I have literature, you can look at that on the slides. What is interesting is that in the end, what we find is that it doesn't work very well, okay? So labels, so just to take the example of labels, there is a problem with the quality information and problem of trust, okay? For all these means of changing behaviors to work, there is a need they have to be trusted, okay? If people think it's just, so it is not, you cannot trust it, it doesn't work, okay? So there is this question of trust. For nudges, there is a question of the fact that it can work, but just on a limited span. People forget very, very fast, okay? It's very difficult to have permanent changes through these means. For interaction with price policies, it's interesting that this is the question of extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation. People can say, okay, I have made an effort, I have made small gestures, I don't eat meat anymore, I don't take the plane, so don't bother me with carbon pricing, okay? And reject global policies because they think they are already doing their job. Or it can work the other way around. So the literature is not conclusive on that. Okay. For habit is very important. If we are born in a society where you eat a lot of meat, you will eat a lot of meat, okay? So habits are very important and very difficult to change. And so maybe we can think that the renewal of generation may help. Young people may not have the bad habits the old generation have, and maybe it can be better. There is this work by Chancel showing that it's not so sure, okay? But anyway, the renewal generation may have an importance. And then just to finish, what I think is that, as Edwin has said this morning, the individual dimension is not enough because it's very difficult to act alone, and your behavior is very much framed by the society you live in, okay? So first, sobriety requires the mean to be sober, so it requires changes in infrastructure, cycling lines, high-speed railways, denser cities, and so on, or what we have already discussed this morning. So you have to have climate-friendly infrastructures. Then there is social norms, values, culture in your society, and changing social norms and values is something very difficult and something the economist doesn't have so much to say about, okay? And then the effort sharing. Who should pay? Who should change his behavior? So it's interesting because I have put here exactly the same graph as Edwin before. So the very rich top 1% emitters emit so much more than the 50 bottom emitters that, of course, an idea would be, let's make these guys make the effort, okay? But probably it won't be enough. So there is this question of the effort sharing. To my point of view, it's very difficult to make people accept to become sober if the society is not more equal, okay? If there are so many conspicuous consumption that people don't understand why they should become sober if the very rich consume so much. So, okay, so there is really this question of symbolic dimension also under that. I'm going to conclude. So for me, my view, let's say, is that asking a household to change voluntarily their consumption behavior to become sober, okay, it makes sense. It can make a part of the way to zero net emission, but it cannot do everything. It cannot be a substitute to ambitious price policies to achieve the demand reductions. But these changes in consumption have to take place in a social context of inequality reduction. Otherwise, it won't work, okay? And so I think you have to have both price policies with redistribution, as you said, and also a society that would be more sober-oriented, let's say.
Thank you very much, Kathleen. Now we have 10 minutes, a little more, for questions and remarks. Who would like to come in? Okay, there at the back.
Thank you. My name is Praveen. I'm a joint PhD student between India and France. I'm working with Unistra. So I have two questions to ask. First is, you said about the energy intensity of GDP. You talk about supply and demand. So you need to, you said like demand need to be taken care by human behavior. Let's say a human start consuming less amount of energy. Don't you think it bring a imbalance between the energy supply and energy demand? First questions. And second question is about EV and petrol. When you say EV cars are good to an extent because it saves, gives less CO2 emissions as a social acceptance, but the problem of economics comes into the play because it's still expensive and it's going to be expensive for a large time. So these two questions, I want you to answer it. Thank you.
Yeah. For the second question, for sure, the EV vehicles are more expensive. So the governments, they try to put in place some measures trying to make them more accessible to people that are not so rich, like the leasing in France. You know, there is a policy about leasing electric vehicles that have been very popular. People have went into that in mass. So I think there are policies that can alleviate that, and also they are going to become less and less expensive over time. Like you see already Chinese models that are less and less expensive, far less expensive than the Tesla at the beginning. So it's becoming cheaper. The point is a bit different here. The point is that do we want in Europe to buy in mass these Chinese vehicles or not? The US, for instance, they have said, no, we are banning that. So, okay, but I think this is not the biggest obstacle, probably. For the first question, what I found very interesting the scenarios that have been released, for instance, in France by RTE, Réseau Transport d'Électricité. They have done scenarios about the future, and in all their scenarios, what they have is they have a decrease of energy demand of about, let's say, 10% to 20% in 2050. So huge increase, big increase in energy demand. Completely at contrast with what we have seen the years before, energy demand increasing all the time. First, and among this decrease of energy demand, there is a complete change in the composition of demand in this of energy. Excuse me. It becomes clean. It becomes renewable or nuclear, and not Okay, but there is this decrease in energy demand, and so what I wanted to talk about is what do you do with that? How do we analyze that? Of course, we have to make at the same time the change in supply, how energy is supplied, and this decrease in demand. So that, in the end, we hope that supply and demand will remain aligned. But yeah, you're right.
Okay, other question and remark? Yes? Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. I'm Jerome again, from CNRS. So your conclusion is basically that behavioral change is not going to be enough and you call for price policies. I would like to suggest that this also is not enough, irrespective of the price policy you're going to implement, because demand depends on the offer side. So what I basically want to say is that the range of activities that you have to get right for your super motivated, ideological, green archetype to succeed is so vast that even that person will fail in making those decisions if all those options remain open to them. So I need to go to the grocery store, not take my car, so go there biking, take my own bag because I can't take a plastic bag from there, and come back with a real glass bottle, which is really heavy because I don't want to buy a plastic container. You're coming back from work, you're very tired. The bandwidth tax that you have to manage all of those decisions is just insane. So you need more than price policies because people will fail, even those highly motivated people, at implementing those policies. And price is not solving this. So that's the first point. And my second point is that by leveraging price policies alone, what you're going to end up doing is increase inequality in consumption, because the top 1%, by how much are you going to raise the tax on plastic commodities to get those 1% not to buy Coke in a plastic can, right? So the 1% will continue to consume and the rest are going to get hit. So aren't we, is this really the message we want to push? Or do we really want to focus also on the supply side, which I think a lot of the action is, and you said, I'm not going to look at this, I'm going to look at that, I understand this. But what I'm saying is that those two things are linked. You can't think in a world in which you say, let's set that aside, I'm going to focus on the demand side.
Yeah, I agree with you, basically. What I wanted to say is just to look at what have been written or said about the demand side, but I completely agree with you, except about one point, about price policies. I think it's just common sense to try to put the relative prices right, okay? That's all. I think it's just... and redistribute, but it doesn't... The point, the fact, we don't want to do it because people don't want that it is done, because it changes a lot. It is bad for, it is anti-redistributive, it is regressive for poor people, and it triggers big changes that people don't want to make. But having right relative prices is just common sense, okay? But I completely agree it's not enough. It is what I have wanted to say before. You need also to have the social infrastructure rights behind that to help people change. You have to have redistribution, and also you have to have changes in supply, because supply and demand, they are completely interlinked. But so I agree. But I really stick to the price part of what I have said. You don't want to increase inequalities, so you have to redistribute for sure. But I think it's you cannot escape that.
First a comment and then a question. The comment is that if you take many goods and then you say what means sobriety. I think that for some consumer is purchasing more of a good and some other consumer is to means purchase less of the very same good. Because if I fly, maybe it's better I take my car, so I consume more the car and I am more sober. If I don't have a car and I use more car, I am not sober. So increasing consumption in something, I think logically, doesn't mean you are or not sober. You can increase and decrease of good. And then my question, I think logically, I don't see how you can understand without that, but maybe I am wrong in my logic. And my question is that, okay, let's look income. So I don't want to be sober, but I get less money. Is it the case that monotonically I emit less? For sure, if I have no income, I am perfect, because I cannot consume anything. But now, from getting very rich and decreasing the income, I have the impression the curve is not necessarily monotonic. Empirically, what do you think?
I think on the aggregate level, the rich, if you reduce the income of the rich, mechanically it will have more effect than if you reduce at the bottom of because they consume just more. Okay, so, but
if I have little money, I drive a rotten car, which pollutes a lot. I get more money, I can buy a better car who emit less. I have more money, I start to use a big car, which may emit more.
I understand.
So it's not monotonic.
No, it's not the same effect at the bottom of the distribution and at the top, for sure. So it's not, yeah.
How it goes. It's not monotone, so
No.
is there something going up and down? Are there empirical measures?
I don't, I don't know. I don't think
we
about,
can see.
yeah.
We can look.
I don't know, but probably there is, because there are papers about the reduction of emissions triggered by a change in revenues on population, but I cannot tell you like that. I can try to find, but I don't know.
Okay, we look this up.